Hello, friends, and welcome to Awkward Family Conversations, where we have intergenerational discussions of topics of interest to millennials and Zoomers. I'm here with my dad, Rhett, and my father, this is my favorite piece of Rhett trivia, ran his first Ironman at 57 years old. Hi, Dad.
Hello, Ed. Nice to see you again. This is my daughter, Addie, my younger daughter, Addie. Addie, when she was in high school, was a volleyball player, usually the tallest girl on the floor, and the position she played was setter.
Yeah, well, I can't jump, so.
Because you lack fast twitch muscle fiber, as we've just talked about before. But nice to see you again, Ed. We've got a little bit of feedback from our last episode. One of our super fans, Mike in Indianapolis, appreciated the perspective we gave on making sure that people feel purpose in the jobs that they're doing. Found that valuable and helpful. He's partnered in an accounting firm, and so he's looking at it more from the employer's perspective. So it's nice that we're able to help people on both ends of that employment arrangement. So, what is our topic for today, Addie?
All right. Well, we'll start with an introduction of what we have been going over. We had our first episode on just the macroeconomic headwinds, in the words of Brett, that young people are facing today, trying to make their place in the world, which segued nicely into looking at the pressures of the household pressures of finances that are growing and the tension we're all feeling right now. Sorry, my cat is taking a shit.
Venmo.
No! She's being really loud about it.
Well, I'm $1 richer.
All right, fine. We'll do it at the end. And then the next episode is about how to budget so you can keep control of those pressured finances. And then last week we talked about how to find a satisfying job, because 70%-ish of the workforce is dissatisfied with their jobs. So today, since most people are working a job, or, pre-COVID,
That's true too.
since most people are in a current job that they are dissatisfied with, how do you find a job that you like while still working?
Okay, interesting topic. This is going to be almost as fun as the budgeting discussion, I think. So, very excited. So, we usually do 2 minutes of internet research just to test whether this is a thing that maybe isn't is an outlier, or is this more of a, is this really a thing? And it turns out, according to topresume.com, which is, by the way, a great site for folks looking for work in terms of giving guidance and advice and counsel, 70% of employers are looking for another job. So probably not a coincidence that, as we talked about last week, 70% of employees are not engaged with their work. Not surprising that 70% of people are looking for another job, which is good. I think that shows that people recognize that they want to be doing a job that they like, where they're appreciated and where they can do good work. And they recognize that where they are isn't it, and so they're trying to remedy the situation. So again, probably not coincidental that about the same number of people who are not engaged with their current job are looking for another job. Another interesting fact that I found, there was a Randstad survey from 2018, so a couple years ago, that indicated it takes about 5 months to find a new job. So as we talk about, when you're looking for work, patience is going to be important, and we'll probably talk about that as we go through this.
Well, I'll have you know, I once won an award for patience. We don't have to discuss when. You don't have to say when, just know that I did. extra
Addie trivia this time. But yes, we'll talk more about that Patience Award, which is, if you know the mother's side of the family, is overcoming significant genetic challenges for that.
All right. Okay, well then my actual question is, should I tell my boss that I'm looking for another job? Because that just seems like a very awkward conversation.
Should you tell your boss? So in my career, I have and I haven't. And I would say that, like most things, there's nuance involved. In an ideal employer-employee relationship, there's a lot of transparency and a lot of communication, a lot of honesty. And so when I felt that in my jobs, when I had a boss that I was able to talk to open and honestly, then I would share. What I was pursuing. In that perfect employer-employee relationship, the employer owes the employee three things, really. One is communication, and this is just talking. It's also modeling and demonstrating, sort of walking the talk as well. But it involves talking, and that is the vision, the culture of the company. So, what is the organization's objectives? How does the organization want to go about achieving those objectives? And so, the first thing an employer owes is that macro picture of, what the company collectively or organization collectively is trying to accomplish, and how generally they're going to go about it. What are their values? What is their mission? Those sorts of things. The second thing an employer owes is coaching. So, how helping employees learn the skills, the knowledge, and get the experiences that will make them effective, able to execute that company vision. And then the third thing that the employer owes the employee is feedback. How are you doing relative to your performance? And so those are the things that if, as an employee, you're going to be looking for from an employer. From an employer's perspective, the employee owes to the employer really just one thing, and that is an honest disclosure of the employee's goals. Any employer, any relationship involves two people. That's true in the workplace. And each person has obligations in a relationship. And the employee obligation is to communicate his or her goals for his or her own career, and how well those are aligning with the company's goals, the tasks of the position. So, as you gain expertise and competence, like we talked about last time, and become a little less engaged because you're bored, because you've mastered the job. I mean, that kind of feedback needs to come back to the employer in an ideal relationship. So, does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. And how do you feel in the jobs that you've had in the past? I mean, have you had relationships where you got that kind of feedback or that kind of communication from your employer?
Sometimes it's usually kind of casual. I had my first ever performance evaluation earlier this year.
Oh, good.
Mostly just because all the other jobs I've worked have been either through school or like just brief semester long type of things.
Yeah, that still shouldn't excuse people for giving you feedback. You should be getting feedback on I'll say casual, but maybe less formal basis, on an ongoing basis in the best working relationships. But the performance review, it's kind of, people are kind of divided on the performance review. It provides motivation for the employer to do it when it's structured like that, but it typically isn't the best quality feedback because it doesn't happen. The best quality feedback happens on an ongoing basis as performance is indicated positively or negatively.
That is something I've gotten a lot, but most of it's just compliments because I'm the best.
Well, that's always better than getting critiqued or getting criticized, I should say. So good for you. But back to the question about should I tell my boss? I think a lot of it is situational. If you're looking for work because you've outgrown the current position, then that should be a discussion, that should have been part of the discussion that you've had with your boss, which is, hey, I'm not finding this position challenging anymore. I'm not growing in my career, and I want to be growing in my career, and I'm looking for something else. And if the employer can got something else going on there, Ed?
She just sneezed on my hand. It was really gross. She's
being very gross, the cat today, I see. But I'm $1 richer, so I don't care. So. Anyway, if you've outgrown your job and your position, you should be talking to your boss about that. And if you're interviewing or you're seeking another job, I think it's fair. It's basically fair notice to back up your discussion of, hey, I'm looking for something that's going to give me a little bit more growth opportunity. Totally fine to tell your boss, hey, if you can't find that job for me here, then I need to find it somewhere else. And I think that should be, again, depends on your relationship with your boss, but assuming it's a healthy two-way relationship with communication, then I think that's a totally valid thing to do. If you've been recruited, I think that's another opportunity, because remember, if in these situations, it's not like you've fallen out of love with the organization or the company you're working for. It's just the role itself no longer is what you're looking for. And I think if it's the role itself, that's fine. If it's the company that you're rejecting, you found that the company isn't a perfect match or isn't a great match for where you want to be at this point in time, and you just don't see that changing, then I think I'd be less likely. And in the past, I haven't really run into that situation in the past, but I think if that's the case, then you're probably best keeping your mouth shut, going about your business, doing your job, but maybe not sharing that information with the employer. So if you're open to staying with the company, but you're dissatisfied with your role, I think it's fine to disclose that. If you're dead set on leaving the company because it's just not the organization you want to be a part of anymore, I think you kind of keep that to yourself, and then do a trusted network that should probably not include people at your current job. Then I think that's the kind of thing you don't disclose. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
It is.
Good. All right.
All right. Well, then in that case, what do you do to look for work while you're working?
What do you do? Well, so do you mean actual tasks, or are you just talking about more generally approach to your
tasks, and also tasks and tax?
Tax and tax. All right. Well, the two things I will say, regardless of the topic, and tax. The two things I will say, regardless of topic, are always be intentional. So know what you're doing and know where you want to go.
I didn't see that one coming at all. That's brand new. That one's never come up.
Yes, thank you. As your grandfather would say, sharper than a serpent's tooth. It's a thankless child. So, and then the second thing, in addition to being intentional, is to pay attention to details. Details always make the difference when you're talking about success or failure. And you'll hear sports coaches talk about that all the time. We need more attention to detail, because sloppiness, which is inattention to detail, is a recipe for not succeeding. And so, the first thing to know is what you're going after. So, if you're not completely satisfied in your job, deconstruct that, analyze it, try to understand what are the things that you don't like about it and why that is. Last week we talked about, when you're looking for the dream job, to think about the things that you like to do and try to find jobs that allow you to do that. This is kind of the flip side of that, which is to say, okay, if you're not liking it, understand why, what it is that you're not liking and why it is that you're not enjoying your position. And then know what you're going to change, because it's unlikely that the job totally sucks. In any situation, there's usually something about the job, at least initially, that's attractive. And so, understand the parts of it that you want to change. And so that way, what it is, that you're looking for in a new position, even if what you're looking for is that it has the absence of these things that annoy you or make you less comfortable or cause you to be bored or something. So know what you're trying to change. Know the direction you want to move in, and then know what you're willing to consider for the move. And this could be salary, working conditions, title, commute. I mean, there could be a lot of things that you want to change about your role, or there could be a lot of things in your role, some of which you want to change, but those could be a number of different reasons. But know what it is that you're trying to move towards. And then get organized before you even start having conversations or making outreach or filling out applications. get yourself ready to work. So what that means is, LinkedIn is becoming an incredibly powerful tool, and it's the first place, I guarantee you, if somebody sees your name related to a job, the first thing they're going to do is check your LinkedIn profile. So make sure that's been updated. You probably want to turn off the notifications that tell your network that you've updated your LinkedIn profile, in case there are coworkers or your own boss that's getting, that's part of your network, and would get an update that says, "Oh, Addie has updated her LinkedIn thing," because all that's going to do is raise questions. And you want to be in control of who knows that you're looking for work and who doesn't. So turn off those notifications and get that LinkedIn updated so it represents all of your experience, so certainly the recent experience, and includes your recent accomplishments. That's an important thing. So make sure that's updated. Your individual communications as you start to interact with companies are going to be specific to the positions and to the companies, but you're going to cover general topics inside the cover letter. You're going to talk about what position you're interested in. You're going to talk about the company. You're going to talk about what you bring to that role and to that company, and then you're going to close it with, kind of a follow-up. I'll be reaching out to you in this time period or whatever. But so you can draft a template. So get that ready to go so that you don't have to reinvent that or come up with it when you start your job search. So get that ready. And then start thinking about companies, get a strategy together about the kind of companies you want to work with. You did this, did you not, when you started your job search for the job you have now? I mean, you said that you started to look at anything animal related. And did that involve kind of doing these things?
It kind of was like a target practice. It started like dream jobs. Like I asked about the wildlife rehabilitation organization I've been volunteering with, and they weren't hiring. And then I applied at the zoo, and the zoo never got back to me. And so it's like, okay, next. Which was then I applied for some kennel assistant positions that I knew I was qualified for, and a research tech assistant with Vanderbilt. Waited a couple weeks, like 2 weeks, didn't get one of the kennel positions, and then never heard back from Vanderbilt or the other research tech positions. And I was like, I'm broke. So at that point, I was just kind of like, widest net possible, literally anything that I'm like 75% qualified for, we're just gonna do the thing. And I actually found this current job on LinkedIn.
Did you? Good.
I did, yes. And I applied to it. And because I wasn't really looking for veterinary work at that point, it was just like animals, whatever. But I knew that vet assistants get paid, like in the animal care industry, the most money is in veterinary medicine for companion animals. It's not much. But then I just applied to this one, like, I need something. And then there was like, I submitted one application to like a Postmates manager kind of job, and was like, we will deal with that if worst comes to worst. And it didn't. So, yeah. Well, it was like a target that expanded.
Well, that's an appropriate way to do it, right? I mean, because there were some jobs. I mean, and what I appreciate about that and laud you for was that you were ambitious too. You didn't just sort of say, well, what can I do, and be satisfied with what you've done before. Because frankly, there's a temptation there to just sort of keep your sights low. But it's kind of like applying to colleges too, right? You want to have your reach schools in case they make an assessment that says, you know what, we're willing to take a chance. Because again, people are going to, companies, colleges, and those days will gamble on people that aren't quite fully qualified, but may have other things in their background or something in the cover letter or something that sort of says, you know what, there's something different about this person. And we talked about that last time. How do you differentiate yourself in your search so that you can find it? So, you definitely want to have the reach jobs, but you also want to have your safety job, right? In the same way when you were applying for school, you had safety schools. The places that you were almost certain to get in, and then the bulk of your applications would be in that sweet spot where you feel like there really is a good match. And it sounds like that was
that was basically what happened. Was like the kennel assistant job I knew I could get. Like I could get a kennel assistant job somewhere because that's what I've been doing for 6 months. The vet assistant job was definitely a reach because I'm like 75% qualified for it. And then I was actually 2 days after I got offered my current job and hadn't accepted the offer yet, I got offered a receptionist position at another clinic that had been like my safety. then it was like, well, I have the opportunity to do something better, so I'm going to take the better thing.
Excellent. Good. Well, that worked out well then. But
That's it.
the key was being organized, having a strategy, and moving on. Then when it comes, so that's just getting prepared, right? You've been intentional. You've figured out what it is that you want and what you're moving towards. You've organized yourself. You've got a strategy, and then it's about being disciplined about following up. One of the things that people who are currently working and are looking for new work, there's a lot of demands in your time just from your current job and your current life, and you're going to add then this additional piece, and it's not the kind of thing that you want to add on and say, well, when I have time I'll get to it, because as we know, when that kind of thing happens, typically it's a lot, you don't get the kind of outcome that you want. So set yourself goals like any other project, specific deliverables tied to dates. Okay, every day I'm going to make one email outreach or one job application or one informational interview request, or something manageable, something that you can do, but be deliberate, be disciplined about that. Another D word, be discreet. In this world, we're tempted to be full disclosure, and oftentimes that full disclosure is a benefit. When we're in relationships, and trust is so important to any relationship. We're kind of trained that we want to be honest, and not just honest. We're not just going to tell the truth, but we're going to tell the whole truth. When you're looking for a job, it's not the kind of thing you want to keep a secret from your trusted network. You want to establish a trusted network because you're going to need some support. You're going to need some help. They can be a great ally. Referrals are a great way to find good positions with organizations you want to be a part of. But you want to kind of keep it. You don't want to be announcing on social media, hey, I'm looking for a new job. If you hear of anything, let me know. When you're interviewing with companies, when you're having discussions with potential employers, ask them to be discreet as well, because I tell you, there was a story that, well, not just I'll tell the story in a second, but it's about your potential employer being discreet, but it's also when you're talking about your trusted network, you also want them to be discreet. And this is the story. I used to work with a guy who was a good friend of mine now, and he had an employee, and we were in San Francisco, right? So Ricardo went out to dinner socially with a friend of his or a couple people that he knew, and was at a restaurant, and at the table behind him, there were two people talking, and one person was saying that a third person who was not present was just fed up to here with his boss, and is going to be looking for another job because he just can't deal with this guy anymore. Oh, no. And the boss was my friend Ricardo. So he's sitting there hearing all about what a terrible experience his employee is having. Now, the employee hasn't talked to him about it, but clearly had been venting to friends, and one friend was updating the other friend in a restaurant in San Francisco, and at the very next table was the very boss that they were talking about. And Ricardo, being Ricardo, when he finished his meal, he wasn't going to say anything, walked over to the table and said, oh, hello, introduced himself to the couple that was, the two people were sitting there. There wasn't a couple, but it was, two people that were sitting there, and said, I'm so-and-so. I'm very interested I'm looking forward to seeing your friend on Monday, because this was a Friday night or something like that, where I obviously want to talk to him or her about this situation. And that kind of thing happens, right? So discretion is going to be really important. And then the second part, there's a related part of that, and that's, about professionalism, right? The organization that you're leaving, for whatever reason you're leaving it. Now, again, if you're leaving it because it's an abusive situation, this is probably not a situation where you want to kind of hold on to this job while you're looking for another. If it's a situation where you're feeling abused, not just neglected, not just, kind of ignored, but actually, there's actions being taken that make you feel highly uncomfortable, I mean, this is not a situation where you want to stay in that role while you're looking for another job. So we'll assume that this is not this kind of situation, that it's just either an organization or a role that you've outgrown or come to, become disillusioned about, or just don't want to do anymore. But they're still paying you to do a job, and that organization is not morally at fault, that you're not finding the same kind of satisfaction in the job. So you need to give them the respect and the honor. You need to honor that relationship. They're paying you to do a job. You need to continue to do that job. Also, they're giving you resources, computer, internet access, telephones, for you to do the job, not for you to look for another job. So don't use the resources, including the company time, to subsidize your job search. Take care of that on your own time, on your breaks, on your lunch. Use your cell phone, not the phone, not either the internet or the computer equipment they give you. There's a practical reason for this too, in that most large companies monitor their employees' communications, and most of the time it doesn't matter, and you can get away with looking at the news sites during the day, and but they're getting reports that say who's using where people are going on using the network, using their internet access. They're getting all those reports. They're getting reports of email communications, and in a lot of industries is required. I mean, I came out of the financial services industries, and they had to archive employee communications because of insider trading laws, and making sure that you're monitoring your employees, because people have not publicly disclosed information that, if it were used in investments, either by one person or somebody who was sharing it with somebody else, those are felonies. Those are crimes, and so companies are going to be monitoring for that. So there's kind of a moral piece of this, which is you want to honor and honor the relationship with your current employer, be professional about it. But there's also a practical reason that if you are doing this and they do find it, because of the regular work that they do, the screening they do of employee communications, now, that's a little less discreet, and now people know about that, and that can come back on you. The other thing I'd say about the professionalism is always be truthful. If by whatever reason, you end up interviewing at a company, and your boss's spouse happens to work at that company and see you walk in, that happens sometimes. And so if your boss comes to you and says, "Hey, what were you doing over at blah, blah, blah?" You can say things like, "Well, I went over to meet somebody, X, Y, and Z." "Oh, great. Well, why were you doing that?" "Well, they have a position open, and I was exploring that position." Again, you don't have to be full disclosing. You don't have to be, the whole truth, but what you say needs to be truthful. And so you can find that, walk that tightrope between, I'm not going to tell you something that's false. I'm not going to lie to you. But I will answer your questions truthfully. I just may not give you all of the context around it, and I may not give you all the information. But that professionalism, I think, is really important. So, to the extent that you can schedule your meetings and your interviews, and your interactions outside of business hours, so in your lunch or breaks or before work or after work. I mean, if you can't do that, then take your time off, take your paid time off, take a vacation day, because don't call in sick if you're not sick. In part because that's lying, and secondly, especially with people working from home these days, the boss calling you for an urgent thing, if you're home sick, he's expecting you or she is expecting you to pick up that phone, even if you're sick, just to answer a quick question or to get clarification on something. And if you're not in a position to be able to answer that phone because you're in an interview, now you're in a situation where you're kind of, you've kind of lied about being sick, and what happens? So don't even put yourself in that situation. You just do the right thing, and you'll be fine. And then finally, I think when you're looking for a job while you have a job, be steady. This is part about being discreet too. Is about don't let your behavior give you away. If you start blowing off work, if you're behaving differently, where you're usually coming in jeans and sneakers, and suddenly you're coming in a suit. you don't want to do stuff like that that would cause people to say, oh, I've noticed Addie's behaving differently. Let's ask her about that. Again, so be professional, be discreet, be disciplined, know what you were looking for, pursue that. And if you do that, then, you'll make excellent progress, and you'll find, and sooner rather than later, on an average of 5 months, apparently, you'll find a job. Hopefully that'll be a better fit for you than your current job. Does that answer your question?
Very much answers the question.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. All right, I do have another question now.
Okay.
You've been people's boss, but then you've also been someone looking for work.
Yes.
What should you not do? If we've covered what you should do, what should you avoid doing?
Yeah, so you should definitely not tell your friends who are going to talk about you being dissatisfied at a restaurant. Yeah, so I mean, what shouldn't you do? I mean, a lot of it's just the flip side of what you should do, right? I mean, don't cast an indiscriminate net, which is not being intentional about what you're doing, right? Where you're just looking for a paycheck, and the first paycheck comes along, that's the one you're going to take. That's not good for you, because what are the odds of you landing a job you like better than the one you have if you're not deliberate, or you're not thinking through, well, this is the kind of job I want. It's possible you could stumble into things, but it's not the way to bet. And so, don't just kind of throw your resume out there. Don't put it up on job boards. That's another thing you shouldn't do, is put your resume on job boards. That's a clear sign. Because remember that company employers are always looking at job boards for, trying to source. What's that?
What is a job board?
These are things like Monster, Indeed. They're places where you put your resume, basically, and employers go to those job sites and will search resume bank to try to source candidates. Not just employers, but headhunters will as well. Now, early in your career, and if you don't have a current job, by all means, use those job boards. Put your resume on those resume aggregating sites, because people do use them. Employers do use them to try to identify employees. They're not going to wait for people to knock on their door. They're going to go out and seek people. But if you have a job already, don't put it on the resume board, because your company is probably using that job board to source other candidates, and your name will certainly come up, because you have their you have that company experience, and again, that if you're looking to keep it a secret, and again, just because your boss knows doesn't mean that you want everybody in the company to know that you're looking for work. And if your boss doesn't know, you definitely don't want anybody else in the company to know. So don't use the job boards. Don't just start sending your resume, just blasting your resume off to whoever, whoever is hiring, or shows, has an employees wanted sign. Definitely don't blow off your current work. This gets back to this is the flip side of being professional. You stop showing up to work. You're calling in sick a lot. When you are there, you're grumpy or disgruntled, or don't do that. Don't vent either. Employers don't want malcontents. And if you're in an interview situation and they ask you, what's your current, why are you leaving your current job? Best to stick with, well, it's not a great fit for me anymore. I've outgrown the role, or, the company seems to be changing direction, and I'd rather, it just doesn't resonate with me as much anymore, as opposed to saying, oh, my boss is a jerk. They're asking me to do too much, blah, blah, blah. If you start venting about why you're dissatisfied, the person sitting across the desk from you is like, whoa, this person really focuses a lot on the negative, and I really don't know that I want to bring that energy into my team. So, keep focused on the positive of moving away from that job. So when they ask you, well, why are you leaving your current job? Try to keep it as, well, I feel like I've outgrown it. I feel like the company is different, and so I'm looking for something that's a better fit for me, as opposed to, boy, that just is a crappy situation. I just want to get out of there. And, venting, I mean, we all have to vent. That's why you have your trusted network. Save those conversations for your trusted network, making sure that they don't share that information over dinner or in other public places. but don't go spouting off, and definitely don't get on social media and talk about how bad your boss is and how bad your company is or how unsatisfied you are. Or just, social media is also monitored by a lot of employees, by a lot of employers rather, and there's probably connections, and if somebody likes your post and they're connected with somebody else at work, and I mean that's the kind of thing that kind of gets around. So don't vent, and certainly don't lie. We talked about that before. You don't want employees. Employer-employee relation is a relationship, and trust is central to a relationship. And deceptions have a way of being found eventually. We had a terrible situation. One of the works, in my job, we had a guy brought on for a very senior position, and he was a young guy too. He had a young family, and moved down from Washington, and he had lied about his compensation when he was involved with the interview process. And we hired him. He was terrific. He was my boss. And it was about 8 months into his tenure, it became apparent that he'd lied. And my company was adamant that they didn't want a senior executive who had basically deceived him, or deceived them. And so they let him go. They fired him. And his employment agreement required him, if he was let go in the first year for cause, to repay his signing bonus, which was substantial. I'm sure it was a 6-figure signing bonus or whatever. And he was fired on a Thursday, and went home, didn't tell his wife, and on Friday got up like he was going to work like normal, drove onto the Bay Bridge, stopped the car, and jumped over the side and killed himself. And so that's a very dramatic and traumatic thing, and it was incredibly traumatic for everybody involved, just awful. But it all started because he'd not been truthful about about a part of the negotiations when he was coming on, and awful situation. So don't lie. What's that?
That took a turn I was not expecting.
Yeah, it was awful. It was really awful. And it's just awful. And so again, there's it didn't have to happen. There's a lot of ways that could have gone differently. But still, it's not worth it. Don't lie. It's not worth it. We talked about using company resources. Don't do that. Be professional. Keep do your work at your current job, and then look for your other job separately from that. So don't use company time. Don't use company resources. Don't use anyone as a reference that you haven't cleared ahead of time. This has happened to me a couple of times, and I've done it as well. Even if you've talked to somebody, like 3 months before and said, "Hey, can I use you as a reference?" and they say yes, you want to let them know, "Hey, by the way, I've used you as a reference and this job that's coming," because I've been called out of the blue sometimes, and it's like, oh my gosh. And though I've tried to do a good job at that, because I wasn't prepared to talk about it, I ended up stumbling around and probably not giving the best reference. So there's that practical matter as well. But it's also true that you want to make sure that the references that you've cleared it, and that that they know you're using you as a reference for this specific position. And so make sure that you're communicating. And I'll say that there's a practical reason for doing this as well, which is to say that you can coach your reference on what to emphasize when they're talking to the to the recruiter, or to the hiring manager, or to the HR person who's calling about the reference, because it's another opportunity to reinforce the things that you want to reinforce. Because typically the reference call is after they've decided to hire you, they're going to check references to make sure that there's no red flags, that you're not a dishonest person, and that how you've represented yourself is accurate. And they'll very standard. I've done tons of reference calls, and they're all very standard. It's like, what's your relationship with the person who's being hired? Were you a peer? Were you a manager? Were you a mentor? What was the role? How long were you in that relationship? What were the strengths of this person? And what would be a couple of developmental opportunities, that you look at? And so if you've, those are the questions. And if you're an employee, if you're the person who's being hired, you can prep your references to tell them the things to emphasize in those areas. So what are my strengths? Well, just re-emphasize again that I am, punctual and hardworking, or that I'm a whiz at Excel, or a tremendous communicator. Validate those things. And then on the development side, you know what you talked about during your job interviews, in terms of your opportunities to get better. This is the place for them to don't bring any new gaps into the discussion, reinforce the ones I've already sort of disclosed. And so, there's kind of a practical matter there in terms of references and using them appropriately. And then finally, the last thing is don't jump the gun. You don't have a new job until you have accepted the offer. The offer usually doesn't come until after they've checked references. But until you've actually said, yes, I'm going to take that job, you don't have it. And so don't start, geez, you had a great interview. They look like they're going to give it to you. They've talked about doing reference checks. Don't start telling people, oh, I'm going to change jobs, because what happens when COVID happens. So I can guarantee you that there are a lot of jobs offers that were rescinded around March 17th, March 16th this year, when California went into the first lockdown. Any company that had an outstanding offer that had not been signed and accepted, withdrew it. And, you're just, and now if you started that, if you've mentally checked out of your other job, it's tough, right? It's coming. It's like the last 3 minutes of a particularly the competitive game, as it's coming down to it, you're feeling like, okay, we got the lead, but it's not over till it's over. So don't disconnect. Don't start spouting off. Don't start blowing off work. Maintain that discipline all the way to the end of the process until you've signed that offer letter, you've accepted that offer, and you're ready to go. And they're ready to onboard you. Then you give your notice. You start talking to people about it. Hey, I've done this. That's kind of the thing. So a lot of stuff to do, a lot of stuff to don't do, but it all comes down to kind of just being professional, being disciplined, being intentional, pay attention to details, and don't lie, don't deceive, don't screw around.
One follow-up question from
Yes.
that last one. Re-jumping the gun.
Yes.
I had this experience when I was looking for a job this year on a lot of online portals and everything. It wants you to list a start date. Mm-hmm. And so this was when I was looking for jobs in it started the beginning of May. I was looking for jobs. And so I'd say June 1st, I can start June 1st. And then I'd hear back from them at May 25th. Mm-hmm. And then they'd be like, okay, so when can you start? And it would be like, well, I now can't start June 1st because notice. And so how do you handle that? Is there a better way to handle that than just awkwardly being you took too long?
No, well, no, you don't want to say it that way, but what you can say is, basically they're doing that to see if you have other obligations. And it does happen where, and especially when people graduate school, a lot of times they want to kind of decompress. So, if you're coming out of graduate school in particular, you're graduated in early June. Most employers won't expect you to start until the fall, because they know that you've just come out of an intensive situation and you probably want a little time to kind of decompress, get yourself ready to go, set up your apartment, do all that stuff. And so in those kind of situations, they're really not looking for you to start real soon, but they do want to know that you're able to start in the time frame that they're thinking about. So when they're asking you, when can you start? And you say June 1st, that just tells them, oh, okay, this is somebody who's ready to go. And, we get back. They're not expecting you, if they offer the job on May 25th or start to engage with you about May 25th, they're not expecting you to start on June 1st again. So when they say the second time, when can you start? The expectation is that it won't be 6 months from now. It won't be 3 months from now. It will be, within the next month, I can get started. Because when you started your job, started your search, at the beginning of May, and you said you could start June, they're kind of like, okay, that's about 4 weeks. And especially if you have another job, the right thing to do is give 2 weeks notice. Now, that's not always possible, and not every job will accept that. And some jobs will actually walk you out on that day. They'll pay you for the 2 weeks notice you gave, but they don't want you back in because they're worried about proprietary information, and especially if you're in a sales job or some other job where you have access to sensitive company records and customer lists and things like that. They're going to want to be protective of that information. But no, they're not looking for, because you said June 1st on that application, that's the day we're going to hold you to. That's not at all. Well, I shouldn't say. I mean, I'm sure there will be the one-offs that would expect that, but typically they use those kind of tools just to get a sense, because it happens where somebody's, they're like, great, when can you start? And they'll be like, well, I've got this family vacation that starts in a month and a half. And so it'll be, it's a month-long vacation, and then I got to come back. So it'll be like 4 months. That there are those situations, and they're rare, but they do happen, which is the only reason they're putting those start dates on there, those estimated start dates, is to get a sense for your flexibility or how responsive you'll be.
Awesome. That was definitely a thing I awkwardly ran into with this current job, is I was like, I could start on this date. And then I had an interview a week before that date, and they were like, so can you start on that date? And I was like, yeah, totally. Because I didn't want to flake on commitments. So I'm texting my other boss like, hey, so, because I had told her I was looking for a job, and I was like, hey, so actually it's just going to be 1 week.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, I felt really bad about that. Fortunately, they had it covered because, as it turns out, there are very few dogs boarding during a pandemic. So True. They didn't really need me at that moment in time.
Yeah. Well, and the thing to do is recognize that, you want to be professional. You want to honor your commitments. And if you have to tell your new job, look, I need to give 2 weeks notice. I mean, that's for anybody to expect you to start sooner than 2 weeks from the time they give you the offer. It can happen, and there could be reasons for it. And in those kind of situations, you go to your current employer and say, look, I appreciate that you want 2 weeks notice. I can't give it to you because of these situations. But usually when you tell your new employer, hey, I need at least 2 weeks, they'll say, yeah, totally get it. Totally fine. And some of them even say, well, you want an extra week just to be able to get organized and have a little bit of time off and stuff. So, I mean, it kind of depends what the job is. If you're an epidemiologist in the middle of a pandemic, they're going to want you immediately. And, and those are the kind of things you say, yeah, okay, well, that's understandable, and we'll make that do. But most jobs, 2 to 3 weeks would be the earliest they'd expect you to start. But basically, if it's within a month, they're probably going to be fine, and you can absolutely renegotiate that. Anytime you're in a situation, you can negotiate that. And if they tell you, look, we need you, when can you start? What you can always turn that around and say, well, when do you need me to start? And they say, well, we'd really like you to start on Monday. You can say, well, I do have to give 2 weeks notice to my current situation, so maybe, potential, is there opportunity to work part-time or come in on one day next week, which is, my day off next week is Wednesday. I come in on Wednesday and kind of get started with you guys. I mean, it's all open for negotiation. Once you've decided that you want the job, once they've decided they want you, then it's just a question of making it work. And you can whatever understand that is these employer-employer relationships are not one-sided. Everybody, you have needs, you have responsibilities, commitments, and values that you need to live as well. And if it's a good fit, then they'll understand that, and they'll agree with it, and they'll be cool with it. So don't be afraid to be honest and transparent. That's the ideal relationship. As in any relationship, you want honesty, transparency, good open communication. Doesn't always happen, but that's that the employer-employer relationship, employer-employee relationship is no different than any other relationship in that regard. Is that the more open and transparent you can be, the better opportunity there is for you to have a really successful relationship that works for everybody. So I guess that's what we have. So follow-up items, I don't know that we have any follow-up items, but we do have our first Venmo.
Fine.
$1.
Doing it now.
Thank you, Claire. So
She's
if you're
like,
not aware, we anytime one of us swears on the on our broadcast, he or she owes the other one $1, and we take care of it at the end of the episode. So I'm gonna make sure it's coming through.
give me a sec. My Wi-Fi is slow right now.
Oh, it's the Wi-Fi problem. I see. Oh, I need to make sure I'm good. All right.
Well, I'm not going to pay you out of my rent account.
No, please don't. Hey, all right. Very good. Thank you. Oh, very excited.
Claire is currently lying on a towel that I had just used to roll some sushi on the table because she's Claire and she goes where she wants to go, and she looks very proud of herself for this. She was in there for like a whole 5 minutes.
I really don't need to know the details. That is way TMI.
It was very loud.
Yes, I'm sure it was. So anyway, very glad that I didn't hear it as well. So, okay, so that's it.
Recording.
What's that?
It might be on the recording. Just my cat shuffling around in her litter box for 5 whole minutes.
All right. Yikes. Well, this is why I don't want a cat. So, all right, that's it for this episode.
Pick up dog poop with your hand.
No, it's got a mitt on it.
She cleans it herself.
No, you got to scoop it out of there.
With a shovel.
Well, sounds like the same thing to me. All right, tell us about, bring us home.
All right, well, you can find us on awkwardfamilyconversations.com. We're on Twitter at awkwardfamcon1 or whatever it is. You have to send me what that is because I never get it right.
It's at Awkward Family C1.
Awkward Family C1. Okay. The YouTube Awkward Family Conversations, and officially Spotify and Stitcher. Yes. And are we still waiting on Apple and Amazon, or are we on it now?
Not sure. Google, I think we're in waiting on Apple and Google, but coming. Okay. And we are on Facebook as well.
Yes, and we are. You can find us on Facebook. So let us know what you think. Questions, Facebook, YouTube comments, or we don't have an email, but most of our listeners have our personal phone numbers, so feel free to text, I guess.
we do have a phone. We do have an email. It's info@awkwardfamilyconversations.com.
Nice. Go team. You're very on this. And there's also a group text that was started last week.
Oh,
with the family members that was very talkative while I was at work. But next time we will tackle, how do I balance income with interest in job sinking? That sounds very financial.
That could be even more exciting than today's episode, but that sounds good. All right. Well, I'll look forward to talking with you again next week, Ed.
Yep. And I will refuse to talk to you until then.
All right. I love you.
I love you too, Dad.
All right. Bye-bye.